The words cut sharper than any blade, each syllable echoing through the classroom like a cruel strike. The teacher's voice rose above the hush of the room, cold and deliberate, as laughter followed from the rows of desks. The lesson wasn't about academics that day, it was about power. In that moment, humiliation soaked deep into the protagonist's skin, a sting that refused to fade. They said nothing, their silence mistaken for weakness, but behind still eyes a vow began to take shape. If you enjoy stories of betrayal, justice, and powerful revenge, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next one. This was no careless slip of the tongue. It was a betrayal by someone who was meant to guide, not destroy. The sting did not vanish with the day's dismissal. It followed them down the hallways, where whispers turned into laughter, and laughter into ridicule that lingered long after. The words replayed in their mind at night, an unwanted refrain that refused to let them sleep. Friends turned their gaze, not daring to intervene, and the teacher, smug in their authority, looked on as if nothing had happened. But the silence of the student was not surrender. It was strategy. In time, suspicion sprouted. The cruelty had been too pointed, too calculated. There was something intentional beneath the teacher's words, as though tearing down a student was an act of pleasure rather than mistake. That realization shifted everything. This wasn't about a moment of weakness from an adult. It was about abuse of power. The weight of betrayal grew heavier, not lighter, and in the shadows of classrooms and corridors, a quiet determination began to grow. Days turned to months, yet the memory remained as vivid as the moment it happened. While others moved on, the protagonist carried the wound in silence, wearing it like armor no one could see. To classmates, they appeared subdued, a target who had accepted their fate. But beneath the quiet exterior, a fire simmered. Every dismissive glance, every smirk from the teacher only sharpened their resolve. No one noticed the transformation, the way pain hardened into patience, and humiliation forged the shape of justice. The teacher, oblivious, continued with arrogance. They thought their authority untouchable, their cruelty a lesson that went unchallenged. Yet flaws soon revealed themselves, subtle cracks in their armor. A misstep here, a whispered rumor there, the mask of perfection slipping just enough for someone observant to see. And the protagonist was nothing if not observant. They collected these details carefully, cataloging every weakness like pieces of a puzzle that would one day complete the picture of downfall. Waiting became an art form. They played the role of the quiet, broken student, letting the teacher believe their cruelty had crushed its target. In reality, the student was preparing, watching, waiting, planning. Every small misdeed by the teacher, every contradiction, every secret that slipped through their careless arrogance was stored like ammunition. And still, the teacher never noticed. Blinded by their own sense of power, they mistook silence for defeat. They didn't see the storm gathering. It was at graduation that the trap was set. The stage was dressed for celebration. Every student, lined to collect the fruit of their years. Families, teachers, and peers filled the hall with anticipation. The teacher stood ready, basking in the pride of authority, never realizing this stage was not theirs, but the students'. The moment arrived, and what once was humiliation turned into opportunity. When the student stepped forward, the teacher's past cruelty returned to the air, not as memory but as weapon. The very words once used to shame were twisted back, echoing with precision, exposing hypocrisy under the bright lights and before a crowd too large to ignore. The teacher's confident mask faltered. Laughter no longer belonged to them. It belonged to the truth that was now undeniable. Justice was not served in secrecy but in front of an audience. The same peers who once laughed now saw the truth unveiled. The balance shifted, and the teacher stood where the student once had, humiliated, powerless, exposed. Their authority meant nothing when their flaws were laid bare for all to see. And then came the silence. Not the quiet of defeat, but the heavy, suffocating silence that follows exposure. No rebuttal, no excuse could undo the damage. The teacher's reputation, their sense of invincibility, collapsed in an instant. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The silence itself screamed. When it was over, the student walked away stronger, carrying not the weight of ridicule, but the pride of resilience. Success had become their answer, and revenge was not only delivered, but perfected. The teacher had been the architect of their own downfall, and the student had simply held up the mirror. The days that followed held whispers in the hallways, but this time the whispers no longer mocked the student. They questioned the teacher. Respect shifted, not with noise, but with quiet acknowledgement. Peers who once laughed now looked differently at the one who had endured and prevailed. The power dynamic had been rewritten, and there was no going back. For the teacher, the downfall was slow and unrelenting. Authority chipped away, trust eroded, and their once commanding presence became nothing more than a shadow. What they had built on cruelty could not withstand exposure, and what they had destroyed in arrogance had been rebuilt into triumph. For the student, there was no need to gloat. Revenge had already spoken for itself. They stepped forward into a new beginning, free of the shadow that once mocked them. What started as humiliation ended as victory, a powerful reminder that dignity reclaimed is the sweetest form of justice. The classroom was quiet except for the scratching of pens against paper and the faint hum of the overhead lights. In that silence, Mr. Dalton's voice cut through like a blade, sharp, mocking, designed to wound rather than instruct. Pathetic. You'll never amount to anything if this is the best you can do. The words were aimed at one student, a quiet observer in the back, who had learned to sit small and avoid attention. Laughter erupted from the desks, hesitant at first, then growing louder as peers followed the lead of authority. That moment carved itself into memory, not with fire, but with ice. It was not anger that took root. It was something colder, quieter, more enduring. The student said nothing. They could not or would not respond in a way that showed weakness or despair. Instead, they absorbed the cruelty, storing every syllable, every sneer, and every mocking glance. Beneath their calm exterior, a vow began to take shape, a quiet, patient, unshakable resolve that would grow stronger with every insult they endured. As the weeks passed, each remark from Mr. Dalton seemed less like the product of tough love and more like a carefully measured attack. The cruelty became deliberate, a tool wielded not to instruct, but to control. It was subtle in its repetition, a grade marked with disdain, a comment lingering too long on a mistake, a pointed question, asked to embarrass rather than educate. The student began to notice patterns, recognizing the teacher's authority as a weapon used to manipulate futures, deciding who would rise and who would falter. With that realization, the student's silence shifted. They no longer feared the words. They cataloged them. Every humiliation, every unfair grading, every public dismissal became evidence, a thread in the web they were quietly weaving. Friends and classmates believed the student had been broken, believing the quiet was surrender. But each day, as Dalton strutted through the classroom with arrogance, he was oblivious to the storm quietly gathering in the corner of his domain. Months turned into years, and patience became their greatest ally. The student performed their duties, completed their assignments, and followed instructions meticulously, all while secretly analyzing the teacher's behavior, weaknesses, and patterns. Every overconfidence, every careless boast, and every moment of self-importance became a piece of ammunition. Dalton believed himself untouchable, secure in his position, and blind to the patience simmering in the student he sought to belittle. Then, one day, Dalton's arrogance betrayed him. In front of the entire class, he delivered another cutting remark, mocking the student for a minor mistake in a way designed to humiliate publicly. But this time, the student did not flinch. Instead, they remained calm, their eyes steady, absorbing every word. That very moment, the one meant to humiliate, was secretly being stored, carefully remembered for the day it could be turned back with precision. Dalton did not see it coming. He could not, because the student had mastered the art of appearing defeated while plotting quietly. The perfect opportunity arrived at graduation. The teacher, confident and unchallenged, stood before a crowd that had once obeyed and laughed at his authority. The student stepped forward, calm, collected, and ready. What had once been cruel, words meant to wound and diminish, were now presented back with quiet accuracy. Each insult, each humiliation, and each contradiction was highlighted and exposed, showing the teacher not as an authority figure, but as a manipulator who preyed on vulnerability. The audience shifted, eyes widening with recognition. The peers, who had laughed, now hushed, could see the full scope of Dalton's cruelty. The balance of power had shifted silently but completely. Authority, once a shield, collapsed instantly. Dalton's reputation, meticulously built on fear and intimidation, crumbled as truth replaced the lies he had told to justify his actions. He had thought himself untouchable, yet here he was, revealed in front of everyone who had once listened, laughed, or feared him. The student did not celebrate. They did not gloat or return cruelty with cruelty. They simply walked forward with the dignity that had been stripped from them years before. Their patience, resilience, and quiet strategy had delivered the most effective form of revenge, undeniable justice. Dalton, once the wielder of humiliation, was left with nothing but the echo of his own arrogance. In the aftermath, the student's life continued, enriched not by petty victories, but by the strength earned through endurance. Respect followed naturally. Recognition came not from loud displays, but from quiet achievement, and the humiliation that once threatened to define them became the fuel for a life of purpose and control. Dalton's downfall served as a lesson, not in anger, but in observation and strategic patience. The idea that cruelty can be reversed if met with intelligence and restraint. The years healed more than wounds. They transformed them into tools. The student had learned that silence can be more powerful than words, that patience can surpass impulsive revenge, and that enduring hardship builds a foundation no authority can break. What began with a single humiliating moment in a classroom ended as a triumph of composure, planning, and justice. A reminder that true power lies not in tearing others down, but in rising above and letting life itself deliver the reckoning. The student walked away from that chapter unshaken, stronger and wiser. Dalton faded into obscurity, remembered not for his authority or intellect, but for the mistakes born of arrogance and cruelty. And the student, now free from the shadow that had once loomed over them, claimed a victory far greater than any immediate retaliation. They claimed a life built on dignity, patience, and the quiet satisfaction of justice served. The memory of Mr. Dalton's voice lingered long after the classroom emptied, each word a cut sharper than the last. Every smirk, every cruel remark replayed itself in the protagonist's mind, not as a wound that weakened, but as fuel that ignited a quiet, unshakable resolve. The humiliation, once raw and disorienting, transformed into something more precise, a silent determination to endure, to outlast, and to eventually overturn the imbalance of power that had defined so many school days. As nights fell and classrooms emptied, memories of past betrayals surfaced, vivid and unrelenting. Projects mocked for minor mistakes, grades that seemed capriciously harsh, encouragement withheld when it could have changed everything. All pointed toward a single conclusion. These were not accidents or moments of poor judgment. They were deliberate, carefully executed acts of sabotage. Each injustice became a piece of a larger pattern, a map of Mr. Dalton's cruelty, waiting for the right moment to be turned against him. The realization struck with clarity. Dalton's authority, his constant need to belittle, sprang not from wisdom or rigor, but from insecurity. Those who showed promise or subtle brilliance became his targets, and the protagonist, quietly persistent and capable, had naturally drawn his ire. Understanding this pattern did not embitter, it clarified. Every insult, every public display of scorn could now be read as a predictable move in a game the protagonist had learned to play in silence. While Dalton believed the student subdued, obedient, and defeated, the reality was different. Behind quiet eyes, the protagonist honed skills unnoticed, accumulating knowledge, finesse, and subtle mastery of every tool Dalton considered irrelevant. Academic excellence, poise, articulate speech, each accomplishment, each hidden triumph, became a shield, a secret reservoir of strength that Dalton could neither see nor suppress. The more he dismissed and mocked, the stronger the foundation of the student's eventual ascendancy grew. Even the reactions of peers were catalogued meticulously. Laughter that once stung, pity that smothered, indifference that alienated, all became data points, recorded in memory, understood in nuance. Some would later cheer, some would hesitate, but all became part of the careful blueprint the protagonist was sketching, a social map that would guide the final perfect moment of reckoning. From these quiet observations emerged a seed of revenge, not impulsive, not vengeful in its raw emotion, but elegant in design. The plan did not require confrontation in a classroom or whispered retaliation in corridors. It demanded patience, preparation, and timing. Triumph had to be public, undeniable, precise, the very stage where Dalton's derision had once felt absolute. The humiliation he had so eagerly administered would return not as a direct attack, but as the truth revealed in plain sight. Preparation became methodical. Late nights were spent rehearsing, refining speech, mastering posture, and perfecting composure. The protagonist learned to harness every prior humiliation, transforming each into confidence and clarity. Every stutter that had once invited mockery, every faltering moment, was now rehearsed into strength, poised to command attention. The student's mind became an arsenal. Every thought, every memory, every slight misjudgment by Dalton was a weapon, waiting for deployment. Dalton's arrogance, meanwhile, grew unchecked. He believed himself untouchable, secure in the notion that his target remained broken and silent. Every self-satisfied glance, every boast about classroom discipline, reinforced his belief that he had triumphed. He did not suspect that the student's calm was not weakness, but deliberate observation. Every time he belittled or dismissed, he strengthened the very force that would one day unseat him. As graduation approached, the tension in the protagonist was steady, controlled, invisible. Each rehearsal, each preparation, was a quiet storm, gathering strength. The plan required no haste, it demanded perfect execution. Every accomplishment, every hidden skill, every carefully recorded insult and injustice would converge on a single day. The stage that had once been Dalton's arena of power would belong, finally, to the student who had endured it all. The quiet threat simmered beneath the surface. Dalton remained unaware, his confidence blinding him to the careful construction of his own undoing. The protagonist watched, waited, and sharpened the final elements of their strategy. The classroom's echoes of past humiliation had become the blueprint of future victory, and every moment of Dalton's arrogance had been a brick in the architecture of his eventual downfall. He thought he commanded the stage, that his dominance was unchallenged. He did not know the patient, silent observer had already claimed it in mind, rehearsed in action, and perfected in anticipation. And so the storm waited, precise and controlled, ready to arrive when the moment demanded. Years of careful attention, hidden victories, and unwavering composure had prepared the protagonist for the day when humiliation would be reversed, and the past would finally speak its truths. Dalton's reign, built on insecurity and cruelty, was poised to meet its reckoning, not with noise, not with chaos, but with the quiet, inevitable precision of one who had learned to endure, to observe, and to triumph where patience, skill, and intelligence converged into perfect revenge. Decourti. Final days before graduation carried a tension that was almost tangible. The auditorium, polished and bright, waited for the ceremony that would mark both endings and beginnings. Mr. Dalton, confident and oblivious, strutted through the preparations, convinced that the student who had endured years of his scorn remained meek and powerless. He did not sense the storm that had been quietly gathering, a storm of patience, intelligence, and silent determination that now reached its crescendo. Every slight, every insult, every subtle humiliation he had administered over the years had been catalogued, studied, and repurposed, not as wounds, but as tools for the precise moment of justice. It happened again, just days before the ceremony. Dalton's voice cut through a routine rehearsal with its familiar sharpness. "Don't bother. No one wants to hear from you," he said, a smirk curling at the edges of his arrogance. The remark, intended to belittle, landed like a spark. Instead of igniting anger, it solidified resolve. It reminded the protagonist of every past humiliation and, paradoxically, strengthened the quiet network of support forming among classmates. Some of them, tired of Dalton's cruel dominance, began to align subtly, offering encouragement, sharing ideas, and unintentionally supplying the resources that would make the ultimate plan feasible. Dalton, blind to these small shifts, continued to underestimate the one he believed defeated. The opportunity crystallized when it became clear that the protagonist had been elected graduation speaker. What Dalton assumed was a token victory of compliance. A student grateful to be allowed voice was in fact a masterstroke. Every underestimate, every moment he had assumed submission, became leverage. The student's selection was not just recognition, it was a stage upon which years of meticulous preparation could be enacted. Dalton's smug confidence was intact, his assumption unchallenged. He believed that past humiliations guaranteed continued dominance, that the stage would be yet another place to witness meek submission. But the protagonist had long transformed silence into strategy. Every phrase of the speech had been honed, every pause measured for maximum impact. Humiliation, once a weapon wielded against them, was now a template for precision and persuasion. They spoke to themselves as they rehearsed, not in anger, but in calculation, shaping each sentence to deliver more than words, to deliver accountability, to expose arrogance, and to reclaim dignity. Every laugh that once cut, every dismissive glance that had once stung, informed the rhythm, tone, and cadence of the message now carefully crafted. As graduation approached, anticipation became almost a living presence. The student envisioned the speeches unfolding, each line carrying weight beyond mere rhetoric. It was designed to resonate, to echo through the auditorium, to leave an impression that could not be ignored. Dalton, convinced of his own supremacy, remained unaware that the stage he thought secure had been repurposed into a trap of subtle yet undeniable retribution. The day arrived. Dalton took his place at the side, eyes scanning the audience, confident that the familiar hierarchy would remain intact. He did not see the composure in the protagonist's posture, the deliberate calm that concealed a calculated, inevitable reversal of power. The student approached the podium with a quiet certainty, aware that every moment of public scorn, every injustice endured, had led to this precise instant. With a measured breath, the speech began. The words flowed, carefully, crafted to draw attention to perseverance, to subtle injustice, to the value of respect and dignity. Dalton's past actions were not called out explicitly in anger. Rather, their implications unfolded naturally, revealed through the resonance of truth and the clarity of experience. The audience shifted as the narrative revealed patterns of arrogance and cruelty, making visible what had always been hidden. Smiles faltered, whispers spread, and the weight of authority once wielded recklessly began to crumble under the undeniable logic of the message. Dalton's expression changed incrementally, from smug confidence to disbelief to a silent panic, as the audience's reaction diverged sharply from his expectations. The students who had once laughed, who had once followed his lead, now sat attentive, nodding, empathizing. Supportive glances, small affirmations, subtle gestures, all reinforced the protagonist's unspoken point. Authority does not equal respect, cruelty does not command loyalty, and power built on fear is brittle under truth. By the end of the speech, the transformation was complete. Dalton's aura of invincibility dissolved quietly but utterly. He had believed he controlled the narrative, that humiliation would follow predictably. Instead, the narrative had shifted entirely. The student, who had endured, adapted, and grown beyond every slight, stood not as a victim, but as the embodiment of measured strength and strategic triumph. The final words were not shouted, not dramatized. They were precise, resonant, and indelible, leaving a silence that carried more weight than any outburst of revenge could have achieved. The applause came not from obligation, but from acknowledgement of resilience, intelligence, and composure. Dalton's authority, once absolute, lay quietly dismantled, and the student stepped away from the podium with dignity intact, strength affirmed, and vindication quietly complete. Humiliation had been transformed into mastery, ridicule into authority, and years of quiet preparation into a moment of undeniable justice. As the ceremony concluded, the protagonist's life moved forward with a clarity that had been absent before. The past, once heavy with public scorn, now served as a foundation for measured achievement. Dalton's presence faded, remembered only as a cautionary example of arrogance and cruelty undone by patience and precision. The student's victory was complete not because of spectacle, but because of strategy, control, and the quiet confidence earned through endurance. Years later, the lesson remained. The sharpest revenge is not noise, not gloating, but a life reclaimed and elevated. True triumph comes from rising above, mastering the elements once used against you, and delivering justice with composure, foresight, and elegance. Dalton had unknowingly provided the tools for his own undoing, and the protagonist, patient and intelligent, had executed the plan with the precision of someone who had long understood the power of silence, observation, and deliberate action. The storm had arrived, not with fury, but with calm inevitability, leaving triumph, dignity, and freedom in its wake. The gym was alive with chatter, laughter, and the shifting excitement of graduation day, but amid the festive hum, a subtle tension lingered. Mr. Dalton sat at the front, his posture confident, chest puffed with the assumption of control. He believed that every student, particularly the one who had quietly endured his years of scorn, would be just another participant in the predictable ceremony. He did not notice the quiet storm that had been brewing, the patience and intelligence that had been carefully cultivated over months of preparation. The protagonist moved among their classmates with calm composure, each step measured, each glance purposeful, fully aware that the moment they had waited for had finally arrived. Approaching the podium, they paused, letting the weight of silence command attention. The chatter of the room softened, eyes naturally drawn to the calm, unshakable figure who carried themselves with quiet authority. There was no tremor, no hint of nervousness, only a composed presence that invited focus and respect. Every gaze in the room turned inward, awaiting the words that would flow not with chaos, but with precision. Dalton, confident as ever, remained unaware that the quiet patience he had dismissed for so long was about to reshape the power dynamic entirely. The first words emerged gently, deliberate and reflective, drawing the audience into a narrative of resilience and quiet strength. The speech spoke of endurance, of personal growth born from challenges, and the subtle, almost invisible power of persevering through humiliation. Each sentence was crafted to resonate, planting the seeds of awareness without a hint of aggression. Humiliation, which had once been a weapon used against the protagonist, was now being transformed into an instrument of authority and insight, demonstrating that the truest power is measured not in loud confrontation, but in controlled mastery. Sharp turn came as the speech began to weave in subtle reminders of past cruelty. The words, once meant to wound, now became tools of empowerment. The phrasing was deliberate, referencing experiences that the audience recognized as acts of injustice, yet without ever naming names. The echoes of ridicule, unfair treatment, and dismissive attitudes were recast into a tapestry of personal triumph. Dalton, who had believed those memories belonged to private shame, began to feel an unease that crept through his confident facade. The tables were quietly, yet irrevocably shifting. Precision unfolded further as the protagonist recounted the past with meticulous care. Every moment of slight, every instance of unfair treatment, was articulated in a way that exposed arrogance. Without overt accusation, the audience began to perceive the pattern, the logic, the calculated harm that had been endured. Each carefully chosen phrase illuminated the disparity between perceived authority and actual virtue, revealing the cracks in Dalton's carefully maintained image. By the time the narrative reached its midpoint, the protagonist had transformed. Years of quiet suffering into a display of intelligence and poise, leaving Dalton unarmed against the truth that now filled the room. Whispers rippled through the audience as recognition dawned. The connections were made, the implications clear. Eyes turned to Dalton, observing his subtle discomfort, the small shifts in posture, the forced composure as the implications sank in. The audience, once unaware of the depth of his arrogance, now understood the silent injustices that had been endured, the quiet suffering that had been ignored. Shock replaced admiration, and Dalton, caught in the web of his own past actions, realized that control had slipped entirely from his grasp. The climax approached with the final lines, crafted to convert every ounce of past humiliation into undeniable brilliance. The protagonist's voice carried strength, clarity, and a sense of resolution. Each word reinforced the idea that success, dignity, and resilience were the ultimate instruments of revenge. The speech did not merely tell of endurance, it demonstrated the superiority of measured patience over impulsive cruelty. Dalton, for all his prior confidence, could only watch as the narrative unfolded, realizing too late that the student he had sought to belittle had orchestrated a masterful reversal of power. When the final words echoed through the gym, the audience erupted into thunderous applause. The sound was not merely acknowledgement of a speech well delivered, it was a collective recognition of triumph, of injustice transformed into mastery. Dalton's authority crumbled quietly but completely under the weight of public perception. Every student who had once followed his lead, every peer who had laughed or deferred, now witnessed the undeniable proof of his failure. The applause washed over the protagonist, a testament to patience, intelligence, and the power of silent preparation. In the aftermath, Dalton's attempts to regain composure faltered. For the first time, he could not meet the eyes of the student he had belittled for so long. The gaze that had once been filled with unspoken intimidation now held the unmistakable reflection of silent defeat. The moment was not loud, it did not need to be. The quiet authority and measured brilliance of the protagonist left a mark deeper than any shouted confrontation could have achieved. The humiliation, once intended to crush, had become the instrument through which power and respect were reclaimed. The protagonist walked away with unshakable confidence, dignity intact, and a sense of accomplishment that required no validation from the very person who had once sought to humiliate them. Years of patience, observation, and meticulous planning culminated in a moment of quiet but total triumph. The lesson was clear. True revenge is not measured by spectacle or noise, but by intelligence, perseverance, and the ability to turn past suffering into a platform for lasting success. Dalton's legacy, once feared, now served as a reminder that arrogance and cruelty can be undone by strategic patience, and that true victory belongs to those who endure, observe, and act with precision. For the first time, he couldn't look the student in the eye, and in that silent acknowledgement lay the full weight of his downfall. The protagonist, having transformed every insult, every dismissal, and every sneer into instruments of empowerment, had delivered justice not through confrontation, but through unassailable success. Triumph had been achieved without malice, only through careful strategy, calm composure, and the quiet satisfaction of finally reclaiming control. In that moment, dignity and intellect stood victorious, leaving humiliation behind forever, and proving that the ultimate revenge is living well and rising above every attempt to diminish you. The energy in the gym shifted subtly as the applause for the protagonist swelled, rising above the remnants of Dalton's authority. Classmates who had once whispered and laughed now cheered with genuine admiration, their voices carrying respect that had long been withheld. Parents leaned forward, in pride, their eyes reflecting astonishment and recognition for the composure and intelligence displayed. Every nod, every quiet clap spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. The student who had endured years of public humiliation now stood as a beacon of perseverance, demonstrating that resilience can transform humiliation into undeniable triumph. Across the room, faculty members exchanged glances that spoke volumes without a single word being spoken. Some had noticed the quiet determination, the meticulous preparation, the subtle mastery over every word and gesture. Dalton, once the embodiment of confidence and control, could feel the walls of his carefully constructed image crumbling. Each knowing look from a colleague, each subtle nod of approval toward the protagonist, deepened the realization that authority built on intimidation is fragile, and that truth and patience always have a way of surfacing. Dalton attempted to mask his discomfort with a strained smile, but it faltered as the weight of public recognition settled over him. The arrogance that had carried him through years of teaching and dominance could no longer shield him. Every subtle exposure, every carefully delivered line from the protagonist, revealed the cracks in his demeanor, the insecurities he had so long hidden behind authority. The humiliation he once inflicted now returned in an unrelenting mirror, undeniable and complete. The protagonist descended from the stage with steady steps, a quiet composure that spoke louder than applause or accolades. There was no need for gloating, no need for direct confrontation. Triumph was in the balance, in the clarity with which the truth had been delivered and received. Every glance from the audience reinforced the lesson Dalton had failed to grasp. Influence founded on fear and mockery is fleeting, while intelligence, patience, and strategic action endure. The student walked away, carrying not only personal victory, but a subtle demonstration of mastery over circumstance and over those who had sought to diminish them. The poetic justice of the moment was undeniable. The loudest mocker, the one who had sought to crush the spirit of a quiet, observant student, now found himself powerless and exposed. The irony was sharp and clear. Years of attempted dominance and cruelty had only shaped the tools of his own undoing. Silence replaced the arrogance, a quiet acknowledgement that the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. The lesson was complete, embedded not in harsh words, but in the undeniable evidence of achievement and respect earned through composure, intelligence, and perseverance. And as the applause faded and the gym returned to its normal cadence, a silent truth lingered in the air, one that Dalton could not escape. He had taught the protagonist one final lesson, though not the one he intended. Success, the student realized, does more than silence your enemies. It buries them. It transforms every slight, every mockery, and every dismissal into stepping stones toward mastery, leaving behind a legacy of triumph that no arrogance can undo. The protagonist carried this lesson forward, leaving behind the echoes of humiliation and stepping fully into the power and dignity they had earned through quiet, relentless resolve.